You're listening to the Radius Church podcast, recorded live each Sunday in North Hollywood, California.
Hey, good morning. Welcome to Big Launch Sunday in Radius. I see some returning regular faces. I see some irregular faces. That's an odd way of describing you. I'm so sorry. I see familiar faces is probably the adjective I was looking for. If you're with us for the first time today, it's actually a pretty great Sunday to choose to be with us because we're starting a brand new series today, so there's no catching up to do. And the series is dedicated to trying to find the highest quality relationships in your life possible, or maybe you would describe it as a sense of family in a city and at a time, at a cultural time when it might seem at times impossible to find a strong sense of family. Something that we say a lot here is that you have two kinds of family in your life. You've got the family that you get and the family that you choose. You were all born into a family, and maybe that was the family that you were raised within, or maybe you were adopted into a family. But just because you were born into a family doesn't mean that it's a healthy family. It doesn't mean automatically because you've got people close to you that that's healthy, that that's life-giving, that that feels safe, that those are people who believe in you for your greatest potential. We all know that a strong sense of great family is not accidental. It is always intentional. You have to choose it. You have to work hard at it, right? And so some of us, the best relationships we have happen to be people we're genetically related to. But for most of us, we have needed to augment our family that we got with a family that we choose. We need more friendships, or maybe it's your romantic life and you've built onto the family that you got. There's a few severe situations, and I'm sure this is some of you in the room today, that have needed to fully replace the family that you got with a family that you would choose because it's the first time that you found healthy relationships in your life. I actually believe, and you don't have to agree with me, that God wants that for you, that God wants you to have great, healthy, life-giving relationships. He wants you to have a great family around you. I love reading the earliest Jesus writings, this correspondence between Jesus followers and the biographies of Jesus from eyewitness accounts. I love reading these things. Jesus was this crazy person. I don't think he was crazy, but a lot of people thought he was crazy, who claimed that with him and because of him, you and I could have a relationship with the creator of nature, the creator of the universe. If that's possible, that would have an effect on a person. If you could have a relationship with what or who got all of this started, it should have an effect on your life. And so I like reading those first writings and seeing what people described with this new life that they had as they were following Jesus. I look for repeated patterns. These are qualities that they kept encouraging in each other and pointing out in each other because they had started following Jesus. One of my favorite repetitive terms that I hear in all of those earliest correspondence is the term one another. And you read it a lot in some of those earliest letters. One of the examples of it is in a letter that a guy named Paul wrote to Jesus followers in the city of Rome. And he said, "Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves." One another is our English rendering of a single word in Greek. And that word is alelon. The only reason I say that is so you can sound smart when you're talking about this later. Otherwise, it's helpful for us to know what they mean by that. Alelon is this sense of interconnection and interdependence, a sense of one anotherness, a sense of family. And if this is true, what are the qualities? What are the features of that family? Some of them you've heard are written about in these first letters here. Bear one another's burdens. That's what a family should do. Another one is encourage one another. That's something that a healthy family should do. Another one is everybody get together, try to love one another right now. Sorry. That's actually not in the Bible, but that's a really good idea. So it seems like one of the life-changing things that happens, one of the qualities that alters in your life when you start following Jesus is a family. So if you were to choose that kind of a family, a Jesus family, what are some of the things you could come to expect? Well, it says in these one another's, a third of them are instructing us how to love each other really, really well no matter what. That's awesome. We would want that. A huge chunk of the one another's that show up in those writings talk about how to celebrate and how to enjoy each other's diversity and differences. That's awesome. 4 of those one another's tell us how we're supposed to kiss each other. And we're going to cover that in week 3, so be prepared. Thank you for getting the joke. I appreciate that. The rest of you, it was a mix of fear and also extreme excitement. That's what I'm gleaning. Thank you. But that word, alelon, the one another, shows up 100 times in 94 sentences throughout these Jesus writings. And there's a lot of qualities I think we could get behind, or we would want to see in our closest relationships, whether or not we think Jesus has anything to do with it or not. Here's what I want us to begin assuming, is that whatever family you choose, whatever close network of relationships you choose, you have to choose wisely, because you know inevitably you are going to start bearing a family resemblance with the family that you choose. Now, you were born into a genetic family, and you bear a genetic resemblance to the family that you were born into. And it could be the nose on your face, it could be that hairline, thank you, Mom and Dad, it could be the melanin in your skin. But the more potent resemblances we carry are the ones that are not genetic. We carry resemblances and we carry the marks of the people that we are closest to in our lives, inevitably. So choose wisely. Choose your family wisely. I love the family that I'm married into, my wife's family. I've talked about them several times from stage. And the family that I married into is shaped by a set of values that they hold. And the resemblance to these values is almost across the board. Every member of the family bears the resemblance of the family they're from because of these values, not just because of genetics. Like one of the values that my wife's family lives by is drive fast, take risks. They would be pleased to know that my wife continues to uphold that value in her life. Another value that I love, and they will say this, I'm not making any of this up. These are phrases that come out of their mouths frequently. Safety, third. I have totaled 2 four-wheelers trying to keep up with her family. Now, that might sound dangerous to some of you, but it makes for the best stories, and I love hearing their stories. Her dad's a great storyteller, and one of the stories that came to mind this week as I was thinking about the resemblance that you carry with you from the people that you're closest to. Safety Third Family is the kind of family that does this. In the winters in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the parking lot of the church that my wife grew up going to would freeze over sometimes, and every time it would freeze over, that was a chance for her family to get a truck and some inner tubes, tow them behind the truck, and whip kids around the parking lot. So my father-in-law, my wife's dad, tells the story of one time he's out there with his brother. This is my wife's uncle, Steve. Steve's driving the truck, and my father-in-law, Paul, gets in one of the inner tubes and a couple of other kids in the other inner tubes, and Steve is driving them around the parking lot, and Uncle Steve thinks it's a really, really good idea to throw them off of a snowbank that's at the side of the parking lot. So he whips them around, and they go flying through the air. My father-in-law lands face first into the snow, and the way they tell the story is he stands up, takes off his goggles, and then is a perfect goggle-shaped wound of blood on his face. Choose the family that you want in your life carefully, because it will leave a mark. And what they say happened right after that is my father-in-law does not yell. He just looks at his brother Steve and he says, "Get in the tube, I'm driving." And Steve did. Safety. You bear the marks of the people that are closest to you in your life. And you know what? All of us have got these scars and wounds and personality quirks and values that we adopted, that we picked up on from the people that are closest to us. Now, if we're honest, there are some marks that we have that have nothing to do with other people or very little to do with other people. There are scars that all of us have that we made ourselves. And the only way we really are going to move forward is if we stop blaming our family of origin or blaming that last church or blaming that college professor or our ex for the scars that we actually had a part in creating in our lives. Under this beard is a scar on my chin, and it's all my fault. I was riding my bike in high school, and I popped a wheelie over this gutter, and as soon as I pull my handlebars up, I see my front tire roll down the street. So my spokes hit the ground, and then my face hit the ground and smashed up my chin. Well, that's because the little quick lock nut on the wheel, I didn't tighten it enough. That scar is my fault. I can't blame the bike manufacturer for that. I don't think I can blame my family. Maybe my sister sabotaged the bike, I don't know. But that one's all my fault. And so some of us, and you know this, to be mature is to take ownership of the scars that you created in your life and in maybe the ways you've wounded other people. There are some scars that, maybe was what ended the last job, or it ended the last relationship, or Maybe it's just the last thing you said to your dad the last time you talked to him, but you've got some sort of a scar, some sort of a mark. But when you're choosing your family, you're choosing that network of close relationships, we need to choose wisely because we will start to bear the marks that other people leave on us. There's a kind of scar that other people did make on your life. I got a scar on my head that is not my fault. I was in karate for 15 years growing up. That was my sport of choice. And I was in a weapons defense class, and we were sparring. I was sparring with this other kid, and he jumps up and pulls an illegal move. He takes the weapon he had, and he clocks me on the head with it's called a kama. It's a Japanese, like a sickle kind of a thing, and just chops it right into my head. I was a minor. They let minors play with these things. Blood everywhere, and the kid was disqualified. That's an illegal move, but I've still got a scar that my hair does not cover up that shows what's the result of somebody else on my life. You've got these scars. I do too, and it might be from your family of origin. Maybe part of the mark left on you, the goggle-shaped outline on you, is the way your family dealt with conflict, and you're scared of it, or you light up every time it happens in your life, or maybe it's the effect of shame that was laid on you from prior relationships or your family of origin. Maybe it was favoritism. Some of you still trying to live up to this dream version of you that your mom envisioned for your future, your dad envisioned for your future. Some of us, we bear the scars of divorce and of abuse. Some of us, we bear the marks of bigotry and hatred that we experienced in school or on set, maybe in a church. And all of us walk in with a certain kind of wounding, and we have to choose our family wisely. We have to choose our family wisely because there's no way to avoid future wounds and effects as we bump in and around each other. But even more importantly, and something I want you to reconsider when you think about the relationships closest to you now, is don't just be choosing your family based on your wounds. Choose a family that knows what to do with your scars, knows what to do with your wounds. I don't know if you know this or not, but it's really hard to find good, cleaned up people in the Bible. Really tough. In fact, most examples of lives lived in the pages of Scripture are pretty messed up. However messed up you think you are, I'm absolutely sure I can find an example that is way worse than you in the Bible. The Bible is not full of celebrating great people. The Bible is full of normal people who just need great answers and great hope and great ideas. That's why I identify so much with the pages of Scripture. And I want to really quickly talk about a family that one person didn't choose, and then a family that he got as a result of that changed everything. I want to look at one of the most messed up families I have ever heard of before and just skip a stone across this, and maybe it'll be encouraging for us as we look for those close, great relationships in our lives. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Genesis 25. It's the very first installment of the Torah. It's the first manuscript of the Jewish scriptures. And if you don't have a Bible with you or an app with it, that's fine. We're going to put the sentences up on the screen. Nobody has to lose track. And the part that I want to bring you to is in the family line of Abraham. And maybe you've heard of him, famous Hebrew patriarch, Jewish patriarch Abraham. He has a son, miraculously. His son's name is Isaac. Isaac grows up. He gets married to a woman named Rebekah. And then Isaac and Rebekah, they start having kids. And in Genesis 25, verse 24, here's the kind of family that Isaac was creating. When the time came for her to give birth, Rebekah to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. Imagine that's what you're remembered for forever. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, and with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. Now, this was a time and a culture that believed that the name you bestowed on a kid had something to do with their destiny. So parents would choose a name based on what they envisioned or hoped for their kid, or maybe what they intuited for their kid. Like they think this might be where their life is going to go. So what do these parents intend or envision for the future of these children based on their names? These wonderful parents first named their first twin Esau, which simply means hairy and red. Super creative, Mom. For the rest of his life, every time somebody says his name, they're just describing what he looks like. He's like, thanks, I know this about myself. What did they envision for the second twin? The younger twin, Jacob. It literally means heel grabber, because that's what he was doing on the way out of the womb. But what it meant culturally was, it's kind of hard to describe it because it can be so negative and so positive at the same time. But literally, culturally at least, it was applied to one who wants to take the place of another. On the positive, that could be describing a really ambitious person. Nothing wrong with that. But the negative connotation, which is probably what they intended, was somebody who always wanted to supplant, always wanted to grab away from somebody else, always wanted to pretend to be somebody else, somebody who wanted to deceive so they could fit in with somebody else. Grabber, pretender, deceiver. Imagine walking through your life and that's your calling card. That's your name. Anybody got daughters in the room? Yeah, I've got a couple of them. They're not old enough to date, but when they're 40-something and they're allowed to date, imagine them coming home to me and be like, Dad, I met the greatest guy. Oh, tell me about him. Well, his name's Grabber. So you know, just as a father, I just assume that is every boy's name who's going to date my daughter. You go out for like a job interview, like, wow, great education, great resume, but your name is Deceiver. Tell me about that. I can explain. So they're not starting off well. The family's definitely leaving a mark. Next sentence says, the boys grew up and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, their dad, who had a taste for wild game, he loved Esau. But Rebekah, the mom, she loved Jacob. Already playing favorites here, which is tough because they're so different. It's hard not to play favorites. Esau, what I imagine, he's just this macho, like hairy hunter. He's a good cook, you know. He's like the perfect specimen. And if you're into that, or if you look up to that, then Esau might be your favorite. And it's hard not to act like you prefer to be identified with him and associated with him and be around him. Jacob, on the other hand, is the opposite. I imagine sort of a reserved, kind of a homebody. A learner, maybe. I'm making this part up, but he could be a learner, he could be an artist, but he's someone who's maybe an introvert, you know. Now, even though Jacob's mom doted over him, it's without the affection and the attention of his father, that's going to leave a mark. And then, of course, it gets compounded. I'm going to jump ahead in their story, Genesis 27, verse 1. When Isaac was old, when the dad was old, his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see. He called for Esau, the older twin. He said to him, my son. Here I am, he answered. Isaac said, I'm now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow. I want you to go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like. Bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. Now, this is not an inheritance. That would usually be split up among the male heirs of a family so they could care for the entire family. But a blessing really was a significant statement of destiny on one child, usually the oldest male. And they believed it had power. They believed it shaped your future. There's one person in this family that gets this blessing. It's a destiny bestowed on this one person. This is the time. Isaac might be nearing death. He wants to give this to his oldest son, Esau. And here's how jacked up this family is. Rebekah, the mom, she's overhearing this conversation, so she gets Jacob, the younger twin. And she says, hey, I'm going to cook up one of these recipes. Esau learned them from me anyways. I'm going to cook up this thing. Jacob, I want you to go in and pretend to be your brother so you get the blessing. And culturally, there's no taking backsies. So if Jacob gets it, he's got it, okay? So I want you to do that. So what she's saying, this is the mom. I'm going to lie to your dad, okay? And I'm going to get you to lie and pretend to be somebody else. And we're probably going to ruin your brother's future. You in? Jacob's like, that sounds awesome, Mom. Let's do that. Verse 15, then Rebekah, she took the best clothes of Esau, her older son. She had those in the house. She put them on her younger son, Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she'd made. Isaac must have been really, really old, could not see very well, might have even been losing it if this plan is going to work, okay? Verse 18, so Jacob went to his father. He said, my father. Yes, my son, he answered. Who is it? Jacob said to his father, I'm Esau, your firstborn, of course. I've done as you've told me. Please sit up, eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing. This is the point in this message where you're asking yourself, why are you dragging us through this? This has nothing to do with my life, unless, of course, you've dressed like one of your siblings to get the blessing of a parent. I don't think you've done this. Maybe you have. But where we can easily identify with this is how often do we contort and distort ourselves to become acceptable to the people whose acceptance we value most? Half of us are pretending right now, maybe more than half. The other half are just better at it. How often have you even changed your personality so that you could fit in with this team or in that relationship or with that church? How many of you are distorting, contorting your body just because it seems like that's the only way you will be accepted? I understand trying to change myself to try and be seen as someone I wished I was in the eyes of someone I wished liked me. So even though the specifics may not resonate with us, the heart behind it is a wound that all of us carry. Now, one of the things that we can remember in this is that we cannot pretend our way into freedom. We can't pretend our way into the real us. And what's so sad for Jacob and so sad for some of us in this room is that we are just postponing exploring what makes us uniquely wonderful because we're spending so much time trying to be somebody that we're not. Esau was everything Jacob wasn't, but the longer Jacob tried to be like his brother, the longer he was postponing exploring all the ways Jacob was nothing, or that Esau was nothing like Jacob. Well, Isaac falls for it. He gives his blessing to Jacob, which is binding. Esau comes back, and Jacob probably thinks, if it's between him and me, I'm totally toast. I can't stand up to this guy. So he takes off. He leaves town. Verse 10, or Genesis 20, verse 10, Jacob leaves Beersheba. That's where they were living. He set out for Haran, another area where there was some family. And when he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep, which is about as low and pathetic as it could possibly get. Totally alone, no sign of hope of rekindling or restoring a relationship with his family. The best he has for a pillow is this rock. Now, we can't give Jacob too much credit because some of those wounds he's got, those are his fault. You know, he is definitely a part of the crime that was committed. He's complicit in that. But on the other hand, we can also see where it was just a result of the family of origin, those closest relationships and the wounds that were left on him from the moment he was named until this moment where he lays his head on a rock. See, the fact is every single one of us is the walking wounded, and that's not what makes you unique. What makes you unique, and frankly, what awakens your unique potential is what happens next in Jacob's story. 28 verse 12, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth while its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, your God, or the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. Now, I'm not saying that you should necessarily pay attention to every dream that you have. But if you can believe it, this was a way in which God wanted to interact with Jacob and make himself obvious to Jacob in a way that Jacob would have paid attention to. Two things really stand out to me in this interaction. And the first one, and maybe most powerfully and helpful for us, is that while I do think that God was with and for the macho brother, the first time God is obvious in this story is at the lowest point in Jacob's life. Even though I believe God was with and for the accomplished, influential patriarch of the family, the first time God is obvious in this story is in this moment of devastation in Jacob's life. And what God decides to do with that moment of incredible, obvious wounding is so incredible to me. Because what God goes on to promise Jacob is that not only will he meet him in the reality of his wounded, open wound, bleeding life, but he will promise him something that we all deeply long for. He will promise him a family and a fresh start. I don't assume that you would have picked up on this, but it's really important I mention it. When God introduces himself to Jacob, he says, I am the God, just in case you don't know, I'm the God of your father, Abraham. It's actually his grandfather. And then he just simply says, I'm also the God of Isaac. He doesn't say your father, Isaac. And omitting Isaac's biological relationship with Jacob was not accidental. This was the language that was used at the time for adoption. I am taking you out of one family legacy and lineage and bringing you into a new one. I'm the God of your father, Abraham, just so you understand. I'm that God that did powerful things you've heard about. I'm the God of Isaac, but not your father anymore, not in the way that you need it. Together, we're going to start a brand new family. Together, we're going to start something different. Now, I'm not promising you that if you open yourselves up to a faith community or to relationships that, where you can be honest about your wounding, that just easily resolves everything. It fixes everything. In fact, and you know this, when you open yourself up and open up the wounds and scars of your life, you are making yourself vulnerable to future wounds because you're probably doing it to other humans. Just this last week, and I wasn't sure if I was going to share this, but I think it's important because maybe somebody needs to know this today. But just this last week, last Tuesday, actually late Monday night, I didn't find out till Tuesday, but I lost a friend who took his own life. And he was another pastor in Southern California. And he had actually spent so much of his public work talking honestly about his own struggle with depression and providing resources for people who needed hope and needed help. He was surrounded by a lot of people who I believe were supportive and didn't shame him, but also by a lot of other humans who I think were trying to wound him in ways that maybe they didn't know they were wounding him, but Christians say the stupidest things sometimes. Can I just be honest about that? People saying, well, you must be struggling with a demon. When I posted celebrating his life the next day, I had somebody comment on one of my social media feeds, well, all he needed was a sabbatical. So I deleted that stupid comment. What I'm not saying is just because you're open and honest that fixes all of the problems automatically. What I'm not saying is when you're open and honest that means you're never going to be wounded again. Why would anybody promise that to you? You know it's not true. But I will say that if you are in a context where you feel like you have to hide, or you have to pretend, or you have to deceive, you will never heal. Maybe it doesn't feel that severe to you today, but maybe there's another way in which you feel like you're pretending and hiding, and you can't really be honest about the ways that you've been wounded for fear. It's not gone well in the past. I know some of your marriages are a total mess. And you think this is the last place you could be real about that. And some of you right now, you're struggling with addictions, or you're just scared, or you are sick of trying to make it in this career because you're living up to the expectations of all the people back home who told you you're the crazy one for moving to LA. Maybe you're still just trying to study a subject that would make your parents happy, but you know you're not wired for it. I don't know. Maybe you move from relationship to relationship to relationship, always changing before it gets too vulnerable, wanting to present this highlight reel of your life, like I got it all figured out, I got all the answers, the future's bright. Man, nobody has got this all figured out. We are all wounded, we are all scarred. And over the next few weeks, what I want to explore together are the essential qualities of kind of health-giving and freeing family. And I think there's a good chance that we'll experience that here together. First, because I've seen it before, but secondly, because the way that we nurture this family isn't just exploring our wounds together. But we just start with the assumption that because God has empowered us to love well, that we can love people wherever they are. We want to establish interpersonal relationships that reflect our deepest spiritual relationship. And if God has seen us in all of our wounding and wasn't scared off by it, but decided to start over with it, then we just assume that's possible with each other. One of my favorite one another's in all of the early Christian writings was actually written by somebody who needed a lot of second chances and fresh starts with Jesus. He had this close follower named Peter, and Peter was a professional at putting his foot in his mouth and ruining really good moments and being afraid. And Jesus would give him another chance and another chance and another chance. And it changed him. So when he had a chance to tell us how to treat each other, he writes in one of his letters, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. Which is just a phrase that says, man, if love is the foundation of how we treat each other, more than judgment and more than labeling and more than categorizing, then anything is truly possible. Let me just say as I close, you do not have to choose this family. But as you go and find those relationships that you desperately need in your life, look for more than just other wounded people, because that is not exceptional. Everybody's wounded. You also should be looking for people who know what to do with wounds. I hope that the relationships you find and you bring closest to your life are not just people who have time to give to your wounds, because there are some wounds that time will not heal. I hope as you find close relationships in your life, you have people who have more than shame and blame to offer your wounds and victim mentality, and the world is against you because your wounds need something more than that. I really hope that as you find close relationships in your life, you find more than somebody telling you you aren't really wounded, because you know that's not true. I don't think that we're going to get through this life without enduring another wound from each other, but I know that hiding is never going to heal us. I hope that you find a community with something stronger than your wound, so you have a high chance of a second chance and a brand new story. In this place, we just assume that God saw us when we are our most vulnerable, our most wounded, our most bloody, and that's who he started over with. Would you stand up with us as we pray and sing about the God who loves us that much? God, thank you that you give us all a chance to find a family to start over with, because that's what we long for. We do not want to endure this life alone, but we're afraid, God, of what it takes to open ourselves up to each other again. Make us more curious. Make us courageous so that we can be vulnerable. But more importantly, God, so that we can be transformed. Because that's what your love does. None of us has the power to completely heal these wounds, but you do. So Jesus, that's why we pray it in your name. Amen.
Thank you for listening. For more information, follow us on social media at Radius Church LA and visit us on the web at radius.la.